You're listening to The Donor Doctor Show, where your host, James Newberry, will help you improve the health of your fundraising. Now over to James.
Hello, this is The Donor Doctor again, and I have a special guest that I talked to you about last week, Dr. Richard Dressner. He is the president of Capital Development. He got his BA from George Washington University, where he was elected to Phi Beta Kappa, and his PhD in American Intellectual History from Cornell University. To be honest, we're not used to having guests like you, but welcome.
Well, thank you, Jim, and I'm going to try to elevate myself to your standards.
Oh, thank you very much. Now, one of the things we worked together, of course, at Fundraising Strategies, and I was very impressed by the amount of research you did. Do you have any hints for people? I'm reminded of a story from a fundraiser for the University of Southern California, and they had somebody ended up giving them like $30-40 million for their dental school, and he approached them versus the other way around because they just missed them. Have you had stories like that?
Well, the topic of research is an interesting one and probably fits into what you and I have talked about a lot, and I have a feeling your listeners may be most interested in. Universities, academic fundraising invests an enormous amount of money in donor research. And in fact, what we've come to discover is that it's almost too much of an investment in research. There are other ways of telling and determining if a donor is a good prospect or not. So I think there's a real contrast between doing research on a direct mail donor versus doing research on someone who's already donating to your organization, making major gifts. So let me give you some examples, okay, Jim?
Okay.
Good. Back at the university, we would have some alumni. And in fact, our audience, we knew were going to be alumni or wealthy individuals, corporations located in the region that the university was in. With direct mail, it's very different. And in fact, that's the biggest difference I discovered, going from an academic background, from an academic setting, where I had been vice president for advancement at the university, going to Mount Vernon, which is a nonprofit museum.
Right.
Revelation. There's no natural constituency. We have to go find our constituency. And the way you find the constituency, research is important, but we know the major donors to the largest museums and largest organizations. Finding wealthy people is not the challenge. The challenge for a nonprofit organization that doesn't have a natural constituency, doesn't have alumni, got to extend beyond its city or regional boundaries, is the strength of the message. It's got to have a case for support, a message that's compelling enough and strong enough to appeal to people in a much wider geographic area. And in that sense, the research of individuals, I always feel for nonprofits and for museums, is less important than those kinds of organizations that have a natural constituency and a captive audience.
Very interesting. Now, one of the things that I think is important for any kind of fundraising is patience. You can put a lot of work out and you don't see any results, but you've done a wide variety. You've talked about education, you talked about your time at Mount Vernon and museums, but you've also done animal welfare and think tanks. And I had Hillary Wood as a guest earlier, and she got like a $800,000 gift, but it wasn't until a couple years down the road. Isn't that the case that often the fruits of your labor don't come out for several years down the road?
That's right. That's right. Now, in academic fundraising, building a relationship with your alumni base is crucial, and you hope eventually you'll get a gift. The same thing does apply to museums and nonprofit organizations. Establishing and maintaining a relationship will, hopefully in the future, surprise you with a large gift. But I'm going to add something. And again, this is my experience moving from an academic background a traditional fundraising environment to what I consider much more of an entrepreneurial environment at Mount Vernon and the nonprofits I've worked with over the last 15 years. The greatest difficulty and problem that I see on nonprofits is waiting too long to make the ask. The important thing, and this is, Jim, what you and I discovered working together at Fundraising Strategies, because often you would do the direct mail, and I would work with the client on major gift fundraising. And we did something that in some ways picked up on the Mount Vernon experience, but went way beyond the Mount Vernon experience. With a prospect, with a donor who had only made a few gifts, we actually contacted those donors, made a personal visit to those donors, and were able to generate $25,000 plus gifts, which in any definition is a pretty good size gift. Right. And then, of course, the largest gifts would come as legacy gifts. They'll come as planned gifts of someone leaving something in their will. So then it becomes important to maintain the relationship. But the biggest challenge and the biggest problem I see on nonprofits is not going after those major gift prospects soon enough. In some ways, the biggest downfall is waiting too long. Not that we want to be rejected, but you got to get out there and make the ask.
Right, you want to get them while they're still passionate.
They're passionate. They know your organization because they've made some gifts. And remember, they're making the gift based on the strength of your argument, which we could talk about what makes a good argument and a bad argument, but they're making it based on the argument. They're not making the gift based on a multi-year relationship the way alumni make a gift.
Right. Well, what does make a good argument?
To me, the best argument is, and I believe that whether it's small gifts or large gifts, and you're so good and Stuart's good at making these kinds of arguments in your direct mail. Your organization has got to make a difference in the lives of somebody other than your organization. What good are you doing? What impact are you having? How is your case a compelling case that someone not giving you money, but somebody supporting you and joining your effort is helping to improve the lot of somebody else? Now, we did have a lot of animal clients, and there was, how could you actually improve the lot and improve the benefit of particular animals, endangered animals? But generally, whether it's education, health-related, museum, we have got to demonstrate a compelling case with some urgency that what we're doing will make a difference in the lives of somebody else. And that makes the strongest case. And interestingly, most organizations don't position themselves that way. If you read mission statements and if you read traditional case statements, they talk about the organization and they don't talk about impact, they don't talk about urgency, and they don't talk about why does this matter? What difference does it make?
Good point.
A little tougher for museums, but so why do we need a Civil War museum? Or why do we need a museum on George Washington? Or why is it important to continue telling the story of World War II? And you've got to demonstrate it.
That brings us to your president of capital development, and that's can you tell us a little bit about what capital development does?
I started Capital Development, which is a consulting firm, about 8 or 9 years ago. It was an outgrowth of the work that I had been doing for fundraising strategies. What we had been doing there in as Next Step Philanthropy as part of fundraising strategy was working with a group of clients who were already direct mail clients of the firm. And we were building capital campaigns and major gift programs. But what I always wanted to do is to go beyond that and work with a set of clients, not only who had direct mail programs, but large museums and organizations where I felt we could provide some help in positioning themselves for capital campaigns. So we had, and then I put together a group of associates, former head of the Smithsonian Museum of American History, the former head of Williamsburg and Gettysburg, and we put this group together, and we were serving clients like the Smithsonian, presidential libraries, national museums, where, interestingly, many of those museums didn't have direct mail programs, and of course, we quickly instituted direct mail programs, and we could talk about why that's so important, but they started direct mail programs after they were involved in a campaign and major gift programming. So Capital Development has been a consulting firm, and over the last 8-9 years, I've worked with national organizations. I like to say I'm not just raising money, but I'm building museums. So
you're helping to preserve the history, and of course, if you don't have, you can watch any of these late night TV shows. It's amazing the ignorance that so many people have these days. One of your projects,
and Jim, and you and I have talked about this also. Museums are very different from educational institutions, especially colleges and universities. Colleges and universities, and I was vice president of 3 universities and had been a professor. I never talked as much about education and what the audience would receive and walk away from in terms of their interaction with the organization. I never talked about it as much at an academic institution as I did at a museum. In universities, we were dealing with degree-granting institutions, and it was less about education and more about granting degrees. At a museum, and that's why I like museum, and I've gravitated toward museums, and in fact, I won't take university clients. It's a different world, not just based on the constituency, but because of, I think, actually the business they're in. Museums have a visitor for a couple of hours, and in that couple of hours needs to communicate something that will have an impact on that individual's life. And it does it by exhibits, it does it by educational programs, it does it by really thinking about the learner, the visitor, the family experience, more so than what do we want to do as academics. So that's sort of why I've gravitated toward museum work. And
let me ask you this.
I'm glad to see that you're doing so much work with museums too.
I most enjoy, of course, the mission of the new agency I've formed with Stewart is patriotic philanthropy, which of course is taken from David Rubenstein, who I know gave to Mount Vernon, I think after you were involved. But you directed the $120 million capital campaign. What did you learn from that?
Well, learn some new things and also reinforce some things we already know. The standard gift chart, and we all draw a chart of where we assume that 20 or 25% of the donors would give, the largest gifts. What we learned in the Mount Vernon campaign, and it's over 15 years ago now, and then there was a second campaign, the one that David contributed to. Actually, 1% of the donors will contribute probably 30 to 40% of the total of a campaign. So it's very much skewed to a very few number of donors giving a very large percentage of your campaign. And that is one of the lessons from Mount Vernon. It's turned out that has informed and sort of determined our approach to capital campaigns. You need a handful of people to make a difference in the success or failure of a campaign.
Let me
just one more thing about the Mount Vernon experience. Jim, that's where it was so important. And interestingly, the guy who created the messages for Mount Vernon was Stewart.
Oh, that's right.
Who originally was a writer on the Mount Vernon account, and Stewart was terrific because he could come up with those creative ideas that really made a compelling case, and people were responding based on the argument, not based on their relationship with the organization. That's important to show that the organization is solid, that people are investing in something that, is not going to go out of business. And we always have to show that what we're doing is of the highest quality and with real integrity. But, a lot of organizations fit into that category. But we have to demonstrate quickly that your organization is doing something important.
The direct mail, though, if you're having to raise $120 million, realistically, it's not going to be able to mail the majority. I mean, you're not going to, you know what I'm saying? So I'm aware of a museum that need to raise $100 million, and because they were getting like $500,000 from the direct mail, and they said it wasn't worth it. Why are they wrong? What are they not seeing?
Well, I think they're wrong for a few reasons. Number one, if they contract with a firm, and now let's say they're working with you and Stewart, they're not really investing that much time and effort. And the beauty of direct mail is that it requires little effort, and the money that's produced is actually so valuable because it's unrestricted money. It's money that could be used by the organization for anything that it wants to use to further the mission of the organization. So it's unrestricted dollars. It's not really taking too much of your time and effort if they could contract with a firm like yours that will do, the work. And number three, in addition to the revenue, it does help identify a pool of major gift prospects. And that was the lesson in Mount Vernon, and that was what we did, at fundraising strategies. Can you work off of a direct mail file, mine that file, identify those best prospects, contact them, and we always contacted them by phone, arrange a visit, meet with them, and without really any prior relationship with the organization, generate a major gift. And then in addition, the more you maintain that relationship, building on the direct mail, you stand a good chance of getting a planned gift down the road.
Well, I think also you get some visitors too, and you get your message out.
Well, it's a terrific. You're so right. It's a terrific educational vehicle. You're reaching, people, whether even the people who don't donate the money. Even when you're doing your prospect mailings, you're educating so many people. I just had this experience with Fort Ticonderoga, and the president responding that, she could directly correlate new visitors from way outside of the New York area coming now to Fort Ticonderoga because they had received a direct mail. And they don't view it as direct mail solicitation. They view it as a direct mail communication, which I think is wonderful.
I like that. Yeah, I like that.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
You remember, Jim, we sometimes, don't give direct mail enough credit for being an educational and communication vehicle.
I remember Ginger Catherines, who worked with Hillary. She was telling me that Cloud, the Mustang, that more people knew about Cloud from direct mail than from the Nature series on public TV. That more people asked her about that from that. So that told me there that it is a pretty powerful vehicle as far as just advertising.
I think it's important. I think the visual, and that's what you do so successfully in direct mail. The pictures that you're presenting, the language that you're presenting, the way you're positioning the organization. I think all of that is crucial, whether the person makes a gift or not. And sometimes they'll make a gift, 1 month and then go 2 or 3 months without making a gift. But they rely on that communication, and they like the communication. And that's why I like prospecting, and I always liked prospecting.
Well, that's good. That's good to know. Not everybody does. Now, let's talk about...
Well, they're because they're too short-sighted, Jim, and that's what you and I are talking about.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
Recognition, that's always a thorny subject. How do you recognize one group of people without making the other few people feel slighted? Do you have any thoughts on recognition?
Based on the level of their giving?
Well, I mean, how do you manage that? I mean, do you have any ideas? I mean, there's we like in our direct mail campaign, like to call people founder, but that's often reserved for higher dollars. I mean, that has to be negotiated, right? I mean, would you agree that's an important thing for people, that they do like to be recognized?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think, we've tried so many different mechanisms in direct mail, and that's one of the reasons, I like direct mail, because I don't know if it's totally scientific, but it certainly is analytical. I mean, we've always measured what works and what doesn't work. And we've always sent mailings to, the same group, but emphasizing different kinds of things. I think it is important for people to be a part of an organization's growth. And if it has ambitious plans, they want to be a part of those ambitious plans. And there's nothing like coming in at the beginning, at the ground floor. And that's why I think things like sponsor, founder, early supporter and friend become very important. And I think those things are effective. And they're not gimmicks, because not only do they make people feel good, they are actually early supporters. And that early support is crucial.
One last question. Earlier you said that you thought that it was hard to teach somebody to be a high-dollar fundraiser, that some people have and some people don't. But, I mean, what qualities or what could make somebody a better fundraiser, for the shy?
Jim, I deal with this all the time, and I've gone back and forth. You and I have, talked about it with particular clients, because, so many clients feel that if I just hire a good vice president or director of development, and somehow she, is going to generate all the money. An organization, is made up of a CEO, a president, and everybody else. And that CEO is the chief fundraiser. And I think so much of it is personality, temperament, and courage. I've worked with so many CEOs who just won't pick up the phone and make a call. If they're sitting in front of a donor, they just won't make the ask. And I sometimes think the reason is maybe beyond personality. They don't believe in their mission enough. And that was one of the things that you and I learned from the animal clients. They were passionate about what they were doing. And they didn't have any reservation, any hesitation in saying, if you, would help us, we could save the life of a tiger or a horse or, a particular endangered animal, especially a starving animal. Well, somehow they were able to do it, but the museum clients found it a little bit more difficult. And I think the reason was because those museum clients didn't fully appreciate and describe what they were doing in terms of a compelling message. And they should think about their organization, not in just preserving artifacts, or we gotta preserve history. No, what they've got to do is think about why is it important for young people, for families, for all people to learn from what they're doing. And it's those lessons, if they believe in them, I think they'll become better fundraisers. We used to joke, Jim, and I've said this to many presidents, including universities, fundraising is sales. A lot of people don't like sales, so get over it. It's selling. And that's what you got to do.
That's right. If somebody wanted to use your services, how would they connect to you?
Well, they could contact me. They could go through you. I would, I am always happy to deal with organizations that are interested in generally developing a major capital campaign, and campaigns of $10 million or above. But what I also enjoy doing is working with clients who are already involved in direct mail. And that's why I'm hoping that you and I will continue our relationship.
Well, I certainly hope so. I want to thank you for taking your time. It's very interesting. I always learn something talking to you. I was wanting to ask you about stamp collecting, but I didn't get to that. I know that's one of your big hobbies. And
philately?
Yeah, and then you had one of the first direct mail pieces, President's Side, from the 1800s.
Did you remember that, Jim?
Oh, yes, free gift enclosed. But I used President's Side one time. It worked pretty well. I didn't test it head-to-head.
That's right. When you're not around, I call it the first junk mail piece. But I know I'm not supposed to say that.
Well, it's fine. It's junk if you're not interested. Well, very good. It's great talking to you, and I look forward to seeing you.
Okay, Jim. My pleasure, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.